happened to Navi the fairy? I'm not the first to tackle this question on YouTube, but I've also not seen anyone else coming up with the answer that I have, because the world of YouTube Zelda theorizing is largely younger than the release of the Hyrule Historia and all of the new canon information that came in that lore bible. A lore bible that I think is debunked. This is an absurd Zelda theory, you know how it goes. I want to look at Zelda lore from the position of what's actually in the game and what was likely intended when the game's released. And it just so happens that I think the Zelda team gave us an explicit answer in 2002's The Windwaker. And with the release of that version of the game on Switch 2, there is just no better time than now to dig up the clues that they left for us to find and construct a theory about what happened to Navi with the answer it feels like Nintendo told us at the time. In lore, in canon, that is now lost and only survives on the wind's breath and in the mouths of Zeltek and I.
Nintendo! Okay, so to quickly recap, you know the deal. Navi is Link's fairy companion in Ocarina of Time. She's assigned by the Great Deku Tree to Link, the boy without a fairy, but Navi's role is bigger than the guardian fairies of the Kokiri. She must help Link, the child of destiny, save the world from Ganondorf. Even looking at the game as it was originally released, forgetting for a minute its place as the central anchor of the official Zelda timeline, Ocarina of Time's story has enormous ripple effects on the rest of Zelda canon, and Navi bears witness to it all. At the end of the game, after travelling back through time, Link leaves the Master Sword in its pedestal. Navi, without saying a word, quite literally ascends. But to what? And where?
In the beginning of Majora's Mask, we learn that Link is in the Lost Woods looking for Navi, but never finds her. And that makes sense, because he's immediately thrust out of Hyrule's woods and into this strange new world of Termina, where it's unlikely Navi actually is. Link doesn't find Navi in Termina because he's looking in the wrong place. So what's this got to do with the 2002 release of The Wind Waker, the focus of the rest of this video? The game's events are set generations after Ocarina of Time, and according to the official Zelda timeline, happens in an alternate telling of reality, the adult timeline, where Link and Navi have disappeared from that timeline back to the past. So how is it even possible that Wind Waker can answer this question? Well, it's because canonically in the game, regardless of what the Hyrule Historia says, the timeline wasn't originally explicitly supposed to split. That's just one interpretation. In both the original GameCube version and the HD re-release on Wii U, there are plenty of clues suggesting that Wind Waker follows on from Majora's Mask. There's a lot in game directly referencing it, but first we want to go back in time to that original release.
In the original Wind Waker, you obtain the Tingle Tuner, letting you hook up a Game Boy Advance to your GameCube via the link cable, and have Tingle give you useful hints in the game. In each of the game's dungeons, the Tingle Tuner will give us a page of some kind of legend with some additional lore. The legend of the fairy. The story tells us about an ancient fairy who was 35, plump, and helped save the hero of time with his maps. It reads, "The fairy appeared before the hero, who had found himself lost in darkness. With a mystic power, it would float in midair, dancing above his head like a burst balloon. After the fairy handed the lost hero a map, it flew off as quickly as it had appeared. Better able to foresee places of danger than the hero, the fairy marked them on a map. The legend goes on to say the quest of the hero of time was saved by this plump figure." The story ends by stating that, on one island, they celebrate one's 35th birthday with a green coat and red pants. They do this in the hope of becoming like the legendary fairy, Tingle. This is clearly a callback to the events of Majora's Mask, and, in fact, Tingle's very existence and job in this game suggests that Tingle either reincarnates, is an immortal fairy whose clock is stuck at 35 years old, or that he's a descendant of the original Tingle. You can, of course, dismiss the Tingle Tuner as non-canon, but there's more pointing towards connections to Majora's Mask. Phantom Ganon wields a sword that is inscribed with Hylian text, which, when translated, reads Zabora Gabora, the names of the blacksmiths in the mountain village in Termina.
Some people might think of these as just Easter eggs. However, in the plot directly, while talking to the King of Red Lions about obtaining the pieces of the Triforce, During his speech, he mentions that the Hero of Time defeated Ganon, and after that, he traveled off to another journey outside of Hyrule, which implies that the developers felt they were making an adventure that followed on from Majora's Mask. Even in the original translation in Japanese, it says that when the Hero of Time traveled through time and left Hyrule, once again suggesting that we are following the story of a Link who left Hyrule, the place, not just the time. Of course, we know from the opening scroll of Windwaker that the adult Hero of Time disappeared, which is true because he went back in time with Navi, but young Link also disappeared from Hyrule, which allowed for the return of Ganondorf. If you put your mind back to 2002, the Zelda timeline won't be established for another 9 years yet at this point. And at this point, the game developers seem to be just sort of editing and changing the timeline depending on the release. Zelda 2 is a sequel to Zelda 1, A Link to the Past is a prequel, Ocarina of Time is a sequel to the prequel, Majora's Mask is a sequel to that, Wind Waker is a sequel to them both, or perhaps a sequel to them all. Nothing's been set in stone yet, but certainly Wind Waker comes after the events of Ocarina of Time, and I don't think at this point they're thinking about a split timeline. And by both the official plot of the game and little explorable extras, it seems to be the case that the events of Majora's Mask happened in Wind Waker's history. How this would work is that Link would go through the events of Ocarina of Time as you experience and play them, and when he travels back in time at the end of the game to an earlier point in the narrative, the one in which he defeated Ganondorf, he would leave Hyrule. Perhaps even something about the gods spat him out to Termina, so he can't further interfere with the canon now that he's left the Master Sword for good back in its pedestal. Despite her knowledge in this timeline, Zelda will still flee. She'll still give a different young Link, an earlier version of that same Link, the Ocarina, who will travel to the future to stop Ganon before being sent back, and the cycle repeats itself. All these additional Links being sent to Termina, which feels like it could make sense in explaining what and where Termina is, but that would be a totally different absurd Zelda theory in a totally different video. The Hero of Time, though, would eventually manage to escape Termina, and sometime after the events of Ocarina of Time return to Hyrule and find Navi. And we can prove it.
On Outset Island, where Link begins his journey, it is said that it is custom for boys to learn the legend of the Hero of Time, and on a certain birthday are garbed in green tunics. This is, of course, Ocarina of Time Link's legend, surviving only on the wind's breath. But why is this legend seemingly only celebrated in this way here? Well, the answer might be apparent in the first few minutes of the game. In fact, why don't we show you on the Nintendo Switch 2? When saving Tetra from bokoblins, in the woods known as the Forest of Fairies, you may notice a signpost with Hylian text, far from the village. This place was once important to people in the distant past, and it reads, "This spot marks the remains of an ancient fairy fountain. The legendary hero was said to come here after battle so the fairies could ease his weariness." This implies that the Hero of Time had to visit Outset Island sometime during or after his adventures in Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. As you likely know, underneath this giant stone is a fairy fountain, and within it, a great fairy. Great fairies, as their names imply, are greater versions of the basic fairies. So, could we be looking at our answer here? Is it too much of an absurd Zelda theory to suggest that Navi became a great fairy, retiring in this spring visited by the Hero of Time? This would explain Outset Island's deep connections to the Hero of Time. While we know that the Hero of Winds has no blood relation to the Hero of Time, perhaps someone else on the island does, like Orca, a warrior with relics from ancient battles against Darknuts and a sword to pass on to Link. Perhaps, long ago, the Hero of Time lived in this part of Hyrule, explaining why this legend is so prevalent here. However, this is just one idea. There are others that could work.
Before we continue to that though, I want to point out that in Ocarina of Time, there are only 4 or 5 unique Great Fairies, depending on if you count the one in Ganon's castle and the one outside Hyrule Castle as the same. But in Wind Waker, there are 7 Great Fairies, showing an increase between the games. Great Fairies are said, according to the Nintendo Gallery in the Wind Waker, to be born on the Angular Isles. It's an unusual, seemingly random place that once you're inside has no connection to fairies at all, until you realise its proximity close to the Kokiri Forest, now the Lost Woods. And there is one more thing tying these two locations together. For this is the place where the fishman will tell you about strange orbs of rainbow light. These are the fireflies that, like fairies, can be bottled up. They're only found in the Forest Haven. It's an odd inclusion in the world of Windwaker. Unlike fairies or great fairies, they don't seem to do anything. But given the many colours of the great fairies, I suspect that this is the form that fairies take when transitioning from a regular fairy like Navi to a great fairy. In which case, it would make sense that Link would go looking for Navi in the Lost Woods after Ocarina. That's where it went to begin its transformation back to the home that it came from, where the Deku Tree rests. It would begin its transformation becoming an orb of rainbow light, and perhaps if it makes its way to the Angular Isles, a nearby local challenge for the fairies, it can become a great fairy. There is another fairy though, in Wind Waker that makes a good alternative candidate in the game. The Queen of the Great Fairies.
The Queen of Fairies appears for the first time in The Wind Waker and takes an instant liking to Link. She gives Link the powers of ice and fire, things he'll need on his journey. Her island, the Mother and Child Isles, is like a lost, ancient woodland, and she herself resembles a young child. This isn't too dissimilar to the Kokiri, forest spirits who never grow up, and Fai, the spirit of the Master Sword, who is explicitly designed to resemble the Queen of Fairies. Perhaps this could be Navi, mimicking the look of Link's other great companion, the Master Sword itself, here to aid a future hero when the world once again needs saving. This could work because not only does the Mother and Child Isles stand between the Forsaken Fortress, Ganon's base of operations, and the rest of Hyrule, but also in name, evocative of the mother and child who fled the Hyrulean civil war to the safety of the Kokiri Forest. There are some quite out there theories floating around online that suggest that Link's mother became Navi, and the idea of the Queen of Fairies has been suggested before too, so this could bring things full circle. Maybe it's just meant to be a comedic moment when the Queen of Fairies tells Link he's just her type, embarrassing him, but maybe this line has deeper meaning. He's just her type of hero.
If you think this absurd Zelda theory makes a lot of sense, or perhaps it's just been entertaining, please consider subscribing. I'll likely be streaming the GameCube Wind Waker or the 4K Breath of the Wild very, very soon. In fact, I'll probably be live when this video releases. You want something else absurd? I was part of the biggest Zelda collaboration ever over on Zeltek's channel, so do check that out, clicking the link at the top of the description or on screen.